Welcome back. First things first, welcome to the colony Aramesar. Your pawn isn't objectively super strong, but with the unique combination of Undergrounder and Night Owl, you will make an excellent second shift cook, so I expect good things from you once we get you a second leg. Congratulations also to Callislide for crafting the first legendary weapon of the run. I think. The weapon seems to actually just be a massive your mom joke directed at me personally, but unlike a certain theologically significant figure, I'm willing to let the criticism slide, and am just happy to have better weapons. My avatar is still a little bit extremely mentally unstable, so this weapon instead goes to Minnie of the Double Passion level 18 shooting skill, who will be coordinating my remote assaults in Goose's absence. Just don't push it too much, Callislide. I do in fact have the ability to turn you into a spider if you start acting up again. Deploying another raid beacon at this point is probably too pawn intensive, and also way too profitable at the moment, but there is nothing stopping me from launching attacks of my own while the rest of my colony recovers, so I do that. This attack isn't aimed at another colony though, and it is instead aimed at a cache of valuable materials. A lot of the quest giver system is designed to revolve around there being other factions on the map that you can interact with, and by removing all of them when I started the world to prevent any kind of non-attack faction interaction, I kind of unintentionally broke the mechanics for quest generation. This results in the only quest capable of generating being caches of valuable materials, which despite the name are oftentimes not very valuable at all and tend to be a massive waste of time. But this one is a rare exception to that rule, and it's offering me a Healer Mech Serum, which is a one-time use item that can heal any injury in the game, albeit with some really weird priorities in which one it will pick. Crucial among its capabilities is the ability to heal brain scars, and since I have a fantastic prisoner who I would love to recruit if only they had a brain, this was kind of a no-brainer of a mission. Ha. These quests can sometimes have defenders or a scripted ambush waiting to attack your raiders, but none of those happen in this one, making this more of a heavily armed field trip than anything else, but I'm not complaining. Continuing in his trend of blasphemy through art, Callislide proceeds to call me out on the cruelty of my reactor by making another legendary charge rifle engraved with the tragic backstory of an anonymous, unseen, and uncared for yak, cruelly predated upon. I'm assuming the jackals are my colonists here, but it's kind of hard to tell. The symbology of Rimworld's artwork choices is a little bit esoteric. Either way, message received, Callislide. Maybe. You're kind of breaking up on me here, bud. Can you try boosting your prayers a little bit? In an effort to improve my recruitment speed, I decide to make an absolutely tricked out prison cell for Basser. Normally I just kind of put prisoners in whatever convenient closet with a door that I have available, but I've got to say, the recruitment chances really do go up quick once you have prisoners rooming somewhere that has, actual furniture. It almost makes me want to design proper bedrooms for my pawns. Or, put some more statues in the dorm room or something. Speaking of which, welcome to the colony Draconic. Your pawn, despite having phenomenal traits and a solid passion spread, is not immediately useful for normal colony functions at the moment, so once we get your brain patched up, you get to be the first of many battle janitors. Despite sounding like grunt work, this is an incredibly prestigious position in my colony, since it means your pawn will be on the front lines of the Great Purging. Once we get you trained up a bit. I really want you as my force commander, honestly, but we need to up your construction and medical skills a little bit first. And this is exactly why, because despite a tad bit on the older side, your mum has the big G is one of my combatants, and they have suffered a random heart attack. In Rimworld, much like in real life, heart attacks are a random, life-threatening health condition that can affect anyone, anywhere, without any warning whatsoever, provided that they don't have a synthetic heart. There are health conditions that increase the risk of this happening, but on the Rim, if you're over, I believe it's 40, they can happen anywhere at any time, and unlike most other treatable conditions, your chances of survival are basically zero if you don't have a skilled doctor and good medicine nearby. In Big G's case, I'm fortunate enough to have both, which is probably the only thing that stops them from dying right then and there in the freezer, since they got hit with a really, really bad heart attack. Congratulations there, ya mum, you just got bumped up the priority queue for a bionic heart replacement. In another stroke of good luck, Calicide and Fiona decide to finally seal the deal. I've gotta say, these two have got to be the most functional relationship I have ever seen in Rimworld. They are both crafters, and they're both assigned workstations right next to each other, so they have a bunch of time to talk every day, and those positive social buffs have kind of kept them in the green every time I check the social meters for them. I am admittedly a little bit curious as to why you decided to hold your marriage in the barracks, but I guess, to each their own. This wedding also comes at a perfect time to have the mood buff going around, because my colony has largely recovered from the effects of last episode's raid beacon, kitchen capacity issues notwithstanding, which means it's time to get back to raiding, and a plus 20 mood buff makes that go a whole lot smoother. Having learned from some of my previous mistakes that I made in the last run, I opt to only have the Force Commander land initially. This is still Goose, since Draconic isn't leveled up enough to handle everything I need him to yet. Once Goose has established visibility on the map, I bring in the rest of my team, along with all of the drop pod materials, much closer to the enemy fortifications than an edge drop would bring me, but not so close as a drop in the center would. This gives me time to slowly whittle down the pirates without requiring me to haul all the junk for a return trip into where the theoretical prisoners and loot would be located after the raid, and in general it just saves me a bunch of time. I also had everyone eat before attacking, which is something I forgot last time and was excessively reminded of post-battle. Aside from a couple unexpected snipers causing minor wounds, the fight goes off without a hitch, and I fry a couple of decent pawns' brains for potential recruitment. Both get scars, but one is so mildly scarred that they don't actually suffer any brain damage from it, which means they are still fully eligible for recruitment once I ship them back home. In fact, the attack went so well that I got a bit cheeky with it and decided to do a spot of mining. As a balance mechanic, caravans that are attacked in the world will spawn in on maps without any natural ore generation, but this restriction doesn't apply to attacks that you start on established colonies. Presumably because if you're raiding colonies, you're going to have bigger concerns than wanting to mine a bit of steel. This nets me a cheeky 180 components, in addition to all the random camp loot, and other than Goose going on a food bender out of boredom, I make it home without any issues. This isn't something that I plan on doing later on, both because I have plenty of components already, and because the logistical overhead of managing drop pods full of loot just is not worth it, but in these local areas it's pretty easy to pull off and can net you some good stuff. I have a bit more downtime as I'm forced to deal with several extremely chunky back-to-back raids, courtesy of Randy being a massive pill, with the side effect of me collecting another crop of decentish recruitable pawns. More importantly than that, another marriage happens, this time between Mars and Acrobaticat. My fortifications could really use a rework into something a little more endgame friendly by this point, and I was going to re-engineer them a bit to enable charge rifle dumpstering, but in light of this marriage, I decided to hammer out a few more colony attacks. I apply the same strategy as before, with Goose calling in extreme air support to the designated area, and proceed with the dumpstering. Even when caught out of position, charge rifles in the hands of what are basically professional mercenaries at this point so vastly outclass the pirates that I'm in no real danger here. My brain taser also once again sets on fire a pawn that I want to recruit, of course, and I'm kind of beginning to suspect that the things might have been slightly over-nerfed when they got rebalanced because they have been basically useless so far. Welcome to the colony, Lord Skyline. You are an excellent shot and are tough, but have no other substantial value, so you will join the illustrious ranks of the battle janitors. More pawns with more shooty shooters is more gooder, after all, and by dedicating raiding responsibilities to people like you, I can free up more skilled pawns to maintain the home colony, so you're still quite useful. Welcome also to the colony, Mr. Coco. With the Undergrounder trait, you are probably best suited to be a homebody, but your pawn is suitably average, so I'm going to be more than happy to have you around even if you aren't doing anything special. And after a bit of a pit stop to swap in some bionics and replace more than a few missing organs, my assault team is sent out once again to get cleaning. And oh boy, they came prepared to mop. Other than Vincent getting clobbered repeatedly, the next pirate base goes down without any other issues. Welcome to the colony, Troy! This is kind of getting to be a little bit much here. You get to haul things, and maybe if you're lucky you can do some unskilled crafting. That's pretty much it. I recruited you just for your mental traits. And after a few more days of rest, recuperation, raid cleanup, and organ replacement, and chem fuel crafting, we're back at it again. The chem fuel supply is honestly the biggest bottleneck right now, because a successful raid takes around 1200 chem fuel to pull off, and even with infinite human meat, that still takes a while to refine. I decided to leave Goose home this time so that they can help process all the dead raiders a bit faster, and have now handed over the reins to Draconic, who has been working hard to train their construction skill up to the point where I can trust them not to mess up a drop pod bill. Amazingly, one of the pawn's brain taser attacks doesn't incinerate the pawn that I use it on, so I even managed to pull off a down on a beautiful sanguine pawn who will be well served as a frontline combatant after a little bit of re-education. Things calmed down a little bit after that, and while I'm restocking my chem fuel supplies, I decide that now is a good time to redesign my fortifications into a more endgame compatible format. As weird as it sounds, the largest source of damage from raids doesn't come from raiders anymore. It's from the loss of colony efficiency that comes from cleaning up after their dead bodies. Mental breaks, injuries, bad moodlets, repair work, and hauling may not sound that expensive when compared to having to deal with losing pawns, and they really aren't, but they still do represent a substantial amount of lost time, and my goal with fortifications is to minimize that loss as much as possible. Now that material costs are entirely inconsequential, I have free reign to engineer to my heart's content, and boy oh boy do I go overboard with this. Door cheese continues to be a very solid strategy for dealing with raiders, but mechs that are vigilant can still sneak a shot in even through the fastest of manual doors. That's fine, I can hit that problem with infinite resources, and the solution ends up being just use auto doors instead. I'm tired of sappers not pathing correctly, so I hit the problem with resources and make a 7-block thick wall with more turrets inside those walls to make them path correctly. I'm tired of spending time replacing walls, so I hit that problem with infinite money and instead make all of my walls out of solid uranium, which is the second most durable material in the game, and somehow mysteriously does not cause massive radiation scarring whenever they interact with it. To save cleaning time, the flooring inside areas I care about cleaning is replaced with solid steel, which speeds the cleaning process up substantially despite no longer giving the beauty buff associated with it, making solid steel tiles just kind of useless in general. Statues obviously go everywhere for more mood buffs. Welcome to the colony, Katydid. You landed the beautiful Sanguine Pawn, you lucky devil, so you get to be tasked with raiding and training up various skills in your free time. And since we just recruited another one, let me pull a second name here, and welcome Spivvy Forever to the colony. Your stat spread will make you an excellent kitchen and food production helper once you get some limbs, so I hope you like yaks. The first round of fortification took basically all the uranium in my possession, but by the time it got finished my chem fuel was resupplied, so let's get back to business. To defeat the humans. This particular batch of tribals is built different, and has a ton of pawns that I would be okay with recruiting, which of course means that the one usage of the brain taser I have left fries the brain of the pawn that I actually wanted. They are good enough that I will still take them back and can hopefully find a healer mech serum, and I do get some more from random downs though, so it's all good. One of the other reasons to upgrade my defenses is that it will hopefully let me fix an issue where raiders sometimes get stuck in staring contests in the middle of my freezer. This is caused because someone further inside the freezer decides that they want to go outside and punch something, but the people behind them want to go inside through the freezer. Not, mind you, that it's really much of an issue for me, since I can quite easily just drop mortars on the clogged up raiders outside and take care of them that way. Welcome to the colony, Ethan! You get to help the still quite hilariously named Windex with component assembly, and shockingly, not janitorial services. Welcome also to the colony, Art! Despite being a shoo-in for the artist position, you actually don't have any skills that are super relevant, though I suppose more cooking could be good, I don't know. So, you get to be put in the training program, and we'll just kind of do whatever. Speaking of training, I should probably explain what I mean by that. You might have noticed by this point that I have these random lines of chess tables, or now that I need to get rid of all the leather I have, leather armchairs that are just constantly being constructed. Through some wizardry with permission zone management, what I've been doing is creating areas where only certain colonists are allowed, and have filled those areas with cheap but time-consuming construction tasks. Stone chess tables are fantastic for this, but I just started using armchairs because I can destroy leather in the process, which is something I have needed to do anyway now that my stockpiles are filled to the brim. This lets me assign pawns who are terrible at constructing the task of doing nothing but constructing, which makes a bunch of really awful furniture in the process but slowly trains them up in the skill. I also have a bunch of raider pawns cranking away on mining drills and engaging in less than elective surgeries for much the same reasons, since those are going to both be very important skills to have for all of my away team members. Welcome to the colony Saya. You get to be a raider once you finish your training because I still got quite a few of the initial team that I want to swap out for people who are more suited to the task. Have fun going through engineering boot camp with the rest of them. And finally, welcome to the colony Irigesic. No idea what you're going to do, but I'm sure it will be wonderfully useful. After more than a little bit of digging, hauling, and hack jobbing, my pawns are well on their way to being, well, competent is a stretch, but maybe I can go so far as to say capable in their variously assigned disciplines. Non-passion training takes basically forever, and they will never be phenomenal at their jobs, but I don't need phenomenal, I just need good enough. In the meantime, everyone else is hard at work upgrading my defenses further. My old western fortification wall, while it was good enough for most things, has a similar issue to most of my old fortifications in that it was optimized for less pawns and less money, so I've recently been working on a much more modernized setup that's closer into the base. The turret part of the farm box has long since been outstripped by the strength of raids I've been getting, and frankly it never was of much use before that, surprisingly. So I feel much better ripping all of that out in favor of putting in a bunch of hardened uranium-based sapper traps in close proximity to the colony. There is a fairly high chance that if I do get sappers coming back in that direction, I'm going to lose a couple geothermal plants, but I can rebuild those with pocket change now, so I'm more than happy to sacrifice them in the favor of more efficient raid management. Meanwhile, raids continue apace. Aside from a few tribal encampments to the northeast, I've almost entirely wiped out all encampments in my area by this point. So very soon, I'm going to need to figure out how I want to expand the range of my raiding parties. I've also largely stopped intentionally recruiting pawns by this point. My home colony is large enough to defend itself now, even with my raid team away, and as long as all of the essential jobs are covered, I'm willing to wait and let my numbers grow naturally. Shock lances have proven to be far too unreliable in any case, and the logistics of transporting prisoners from a remote location is basically going to be impossible once I stop being within a direct drop pod range of my home base. I had intended to continue hammering out the last few local raids in quick succession, but Randy had other ideas. See, I stored my chem fuel next to the drop pod takeoff and landing zones for logistical reasons that should be obvious. Normally, this is fine, since one does not generally associate drop pods landing with explosions, but it turns out when a drop pod lands on target and hits a shelf of chem fuel, the stuff violently detonates. Since Draconic was still in the drop pod when this happened, they were magically protected from the damage of the explosions, and I have more than enough chem fuel stored elsewhere that this doesn't really matter. But I will definitely be moving the landing zone further away to prevent accidents like this in the future. I continue to slowly work my way through the accessible pirate bases once my chem fuel reserves build back up, but after dropping a couple have to put the attack on pause for the best of reasons. You see, I've heard rumors of a certain very special item floating around in the frozen wastes, and it's time to fulfill an old promise. Mind you, Draconic doesn't appear to be having too much fun with that, seeing as in order to fulfill this promise, they get to race around the map like a lunatic running from 8 man-hunting wargs, but you know, such is the life of the raider on the rim, I'm sure they're doing fine. This item is, of course, a resurrection serum, which is a rare item that allows you to bring dead colonists back to life, provided that you still have their body. There are some possible downsides to the process, among them being a form of incurable psychosis that requires a healer mech serum to fix, but Orlean has been on ice since their little accident, so the risk of complications should be basically zero. Welcome back, Orlean. Here's hoping your second stay goes far better than your first. A few more successful attacks, colony restructures, and bionic transformations later, and my raiding team is about as stacked as it's possible to get in my current situation. Everything is going swimmingly, and ironically, that's kind of the problem now. Everything has gone so well that I've utterly eliminated all of the settlements within my home colony's drop pod range, and I'm now forced to make a decision regarding how I want to expand beyond that range to continue raiding. I spoke about this problem a little while ago in my last episode, and I laid out what I saw at the time as my only two options, which were either massive animal caravans packed with food, or drop pod chaining to ship mountains of construction materials into a forward operating base. The first consumes a lot of food, and the second consumes a lot of chem fuel and steel, and since none of those are particularly cheap, I spent some time refining that idea, and I think I have a better solution. You see, the problem with drop pod chaining stems entirely from the weight of the steel that I would need to ship. Steel weighs half a kilogram per unit of this stuff, meaning a drop pod by default can only hold 300, normally. Certain items do not respect this steel-to-weight ratio, however. Case in point, a grand steel sculpture, which yields 200 steel when deconstructed, somehow only weighs 28 kilograms, so if you're willing to take a 50% loss on material input, the weight of steel is actually only 0.14 kilograms per unit. Different miniaturizable objects have different weights and costs associated with them, but the one I was eyeballing most closely is a steel firefoam turret. Firefoam turrets only weigh 8 kilograms, which means I can cram 18 of them into a drop pod despite being constructed out of 100 steel 3 components and 140 chem fuel apiece. This would let me condense and transport 27 components, 900 steel, and 1260 chem fuel in a package of 144 kilograms, making the whole transportation process 350-ish% more efficient at a 50% loss of material efficiency to my home colony. Alternatively, if I only cared about shipping steel, I could get those numbers even higher with steel spike traps, which would let me send a ridiculous 1,350 steel per drop pod in the form of 60 steel traps for a whopping 450% mass increase, albeit at the risk of my constructors killing themselves by deconstructing their own traps. This would be a perfectly serviceable solution to my problem, since with it, one drop pod can carry the materials to launch like 16, rather than the pathetic 3.5 that they would normally be able to, but it's at this point that I realized I've kind of been going about the problem the wrong way. I'm raiding. Why do I care about supplying my own resources when I can steal someone else's? For that matter, I'm raiding with no intention of looting anything that I find, so why do I even need to maintain supply lines at all? Enemy settlements are never built on sea ice, so I should be able to steal whatever I need from the map before I leave, and this will almost entirely remove any burden that would be placed on a forward operating base, because all they're going to have to supply is food and fuel, which are both light enough to ship across the entire map without any problems whatsoever. Thus, inspires my new plan, Project Daisy Chain. Rather than require a forward operating base in range of every outpost I need to raid, I can instead simply have one set up close enough to, at a minimum, 2 outposts. If I can do this in such a way that one of these outposts is in range of another outpost that isn't in range of one of the operating bases, I can then springboard onto that one despite having never built a base in range of it. By induction, if I'm careful with my positioning and make sure to pack enough fuel, I should be able to daisy chain raids together like this until I end up at the second outpost, which is in range of the operating base, which will let me return home, leaving a trail of burning destruction in my wake, and most importantly, without needing to establish any more forward operating bases. Randy, it seems, is less than happy with this plan, and in the time it takes me to pack up and launch out to my first forward operating base position, he hits the colony with a psychic drone, a psychic ship part, and a plague, but it's too late. The raid party's already flown the coop, and is in process of constructing a relay point to get me in range of my first operating zone. My current relay point doesn't quite have the range necessary to reach the far eastern seaboard, but it does have plenty of colonies to the south of it that can be daisy-chained all the way down to the equator if I have enough fuel and supplies. This is why I made sure all of my colonists were good builders and miners, by the way, because the end result is not only my raiders being well-lubricated fighting machines, but they're also so jacked up that setting up an operating base like this only took a couple of days. I really spent more time waiting on my own home base to produce chem fuel than I did getting the relay point set up. The first step of the daisy chain operation is a fairly typical raid. Draconic and another pawn, which happened to be Vincent in this case, are sent ahead to scout out landing locations and along with a hearty stash of yayo. Mood control is going to be an issue here, but my hope is that low expectations, lavish meals, and an absolute mountain of high-quality narcotics will help with that. Once they land and get in position, the second stage of reinforcements from the FOB land in, and then they all group up and clear the base. After all the local resistance has been pacified, a timer will start counting down, indicating how long I have until reinforcements from the faction I just attacked will arrive to try and oust me. In my experience, those reinforcements tend to not be terribly threatening, but I have no intention of sticking around for them. While my pawns begin resting, resupplying, and extracting all of the components and steel they need, I tell my prepackaged drop pods of chem fuel and food in the forward operating base to land in my pacified colony. Most of this fuel and food will be reloaded for the next raids, but I hold back enough for my pawns to fuel up their freshly constructed pod arrays and to let them have a bite to eat before the next stage of the attack. The next leg of the daisy chain repeats itself much the same way as the first one, with the only difference being that I draw the raiders out and send the chem fuel resupply into their base behind them before sending in my reinforcements. A raided outpost will despawn if there aren't any colonists on them, taking all their items with it, and while that wouldn't be game over for my raiders, it would be massively inconvenient to get them back on track if that happened. This whole process repeats again, and again. Interestingly, since my forward operating base is technically a colony, it can still get raided, even though it doesn't have any colonists living in it and the threat level is basically 0. This drops the strength of raids attacking it to basically nothing, resulting in every once in a while an enemy pawn coming in, smashing up a few things, and then giving up and leaving. I like to imagine that these raids are infiltrators sent by the pirates to disrupt my operations, but they're so bad at their jobs that they can't even break a drop pod launcher without getting bored and getting the munchies and leaving. If you thought pirates were an easy stomp, tribal factions are even worse. They don't have the electrical infrastructure to salvage for components and steel, so when I raid these outposts, I just deliver all of my fuel reserves in an area next to a steel vein instead of the base. 2 colonists don't quite fill a full drop pod since no one's wearing marine armor, and I've taken to using that capacity to pack around spare components left over from previous raids, which means that I can build my drop pod arrays before I even bother attacking them. Combine that with the tribals being utterly incapable of damaging me from range and the massive movement debuffs that comes with moving in snow, and I usually end up spending more time building the drop pods than I do taking out the tribals. These poor things are starting to fall like dominoes. After I squish a few more outposts, I tie the knot on my first daisy chain and send my triumphant raiding party back to the forward operating base, leaving behind a massive lump of pacified land and traumatized pirates in their wake. After shipping my combatants home, I give them a couple of days to have their replacement bionics installed, swap out damaged gear, and overall just kind of stabilize themselves. I've been working them pretty hard, and as good as it is, Yayo only solves so many problems that come from being out and about with no support structure. Amazingly, I only lost 2 bionic legs during this daisy chain, though Draconic does end up needing to be fitted for a bionic spine since they picked up a bad back from a random event during the mission. After all those get swapped in and they're ready to go, I ship all my raiders back to the forward operating base with a resupply of food, components, and chem fuel following soon after. I also used this time to theory craft some better raid strategies. My existing one works fine, but there are a couple of flaws in the approach that resulted in me seriously slowing down in places that I don't need to. First off, I need to start building static defenses when I raid. Outpost defenders have a very simple and very stupid AI that is super easy to exploit, and for the most part, I've been entirely ignoring this in favor of bludgeoning them with sheer firepower. This mostly works, but my colonists suffer injuries as a result of that, and waiting on those injuries results in a huge amount of downtime that I want to minimize if I don't want world domination to take a decade or two. There is also zero reason for me to be trying to scavenge components from the colonies that I raid. Most maps will have upwards of 100 to 150 components worth of compacted machinery to mine, and I only ever use like maybe 16 components per drop pod attack, so it makes far more sense to stock up a few hundred components and drop my raiders in front of a steel vein than it does to try and scavenge them from pirate bases. The final bit of tech that I came up with is a better form of daisy chaining that, had I not eliminated all the outposts in range of my home base, would have allowed me to get rid of forward operating bases entirely. It's possible to lose an attack on an enemy outpost if all of your colonists are downed, killed, or retreat back to the world map. When this happens, there's a penalty placed on the colony you attacked that prevents you from re-engaging that location for 24 hours, which is usually irrelevant but probably was added to prevent cheese. But most importantly for me, the colony stays on the map after you do this, allowing me to access an even more ridiculous kind of cheese unintentionally added by the attempt to remove cheese from the first place. I know, from experimentation, that I can mine ore and set up drop pods before I engage the outpost, because I've kind of been doing it this whole time. And I also know that the defending pirates aren't super hostile as long as you don't attack them or go near their base. With this information combined, that means that as long as I build far enough away from them and don't stay in the area for too long, I should be able to springboard off of enemy outposts without defeating them, letting me repeatedly use enemy outposts as drop pod launch points to access the rest of the world. This has several advantages over my old solution. The first is that I don't have to establish a colony, which obviously saves time, since even with stacked pawns this takes forever. But it also means that I don't have a colony that can be raided, saving me more time and resources that otherwise would have been used to repair the random acts of uncontested vandalism that I would come back to find every time I complete a daisy chain. It also means I don't have to render a map tile that's utterly useless 90% of the time, which means my game runs faster and stuff happens more quickly overall. My hope is that with this tech, world domination will be mine by the end of the next episode, but we'll see. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.